Hello and welcome to the ramblings of a 42-year-old man. This is Chris Smith, and today's episode is going to be the beginning of hopefully a series based on the Final Fantasy video game series. So today's episode will be on the first game of the series, the original Final Fantasy game, released 1987 in Japan, brought over to the US in 1990. This will hopefully be the first episode of at least 10. I'm hopeful more like a dozen as I go through the main series games. There may even be some side tracks into some of the kind of side games that have been created through those times as well. There's some video game that went onto the Game Boy that were Final Fantasy related. There's been a lot of different ports on cell phones and stuff as well. But we're going to start with main series, and today's episode is Final Fantasy 1. So the very first Final Fantasy game was created back in 1987, released in Japan by Square. The creator was Hironobu Sakaguchi. Forgive me as I go through some of these names will be a little tough for me to get out, but Hironobu Sakaguchi was the creator of the initial game. They named the game Final Fantasy because Square and Sakaguchi himself were really at the kind of the end of their rope when it came to video game making. If this game didn't work out, it really was going to be their final game that they were able to create. So the Final Fantasy. They brought in Nobuo Uematsu for the music, which as we go along through this series and we talk about games further in the series, we'll really get into some of the amazing music that comes out of these games. Obviously, Final Fantasy 1 released way back on the Nintendo platform. The music is all kind of MIDI based, which is very almost like a electronic piano. So you can kind of get some of the ideas that some of this music is really ahead of its time. But as we start getting into more orchestrated songs and stuff like that, you'll really get to appreciate how far the music of Final Fantasy really makes these games. So this was released on the NES, or the Famicom in Japan as it was known. Has been re-released and remastered multiple times in the last 35 years, and the most recent release is the Pixel remaster that they released on iOS, Android, and Steam a few years ago, and there is going to be a Switch and PS4 port coming in a kind of all-inclusive game that includes all of the Pixel remasters from Final Fantasy 1 to Final Fantasy 6. They're going to come out in one video game release on the Switch and the PS4, I believe later in this year. I don't know if we have a specific date on that, but it'll be sometime in 2023. So again, named Final Fantasy because if this did not work, it was going to be Square and Sakaguchi's last try for a video game. And obviously it came out and began a very, very long-running series that is still ongoing. Final Fantasy 16 would be the newest one coming out later this year as well. And so I think we can say that this Final Fantasy that they created was not final after all. Okay, so let's get into some of the gameplay aspects of the very first Final Fantasy. So it is a role-playing game. So you actually do get to choose your characters in this game. There are 6 characters you can choose from. You can only choose 4 of them, but they give you a template of 6. So you've got your fighter character, that is your warrior, your heavy hitter, your highest defense. It's going to be using pretty much every sword that is allowed in the game, every armor in the game. Then you've got your black belts that are also hard hitters, but are kind of mid defense. The defense isn't as good as the fighter class. They are actually best, and they do come with nunchucks that you can use, but they are best with just their fists. Don't even equip them with a weapon. Your next choice would be your thief, which is your quick hitter, kind of a mid defense too. The defense is not nearly as high as a fighter, probably a little bit better than the black belt. It's not going to be as hard hitting, especially at first, but they are fast. They have a lot better speed. Then the next 3 are mage classes. So you have your white mage, which is your healing and your support magic. Obviously, you're not going to be doing a lot of damage from attacks. Your defense is going to be low, but you're going to definitely want a white mage in your party because you're going to need those healing skills for sure. You also have the black mage. That's your attacking magic. Now they also are not going to hit for very much. They're going to have a lower defense, but you got your fire spells, your ice, your lightning, your flares, your hard hitting black magic spells. A lot of times, once you get a little further in the game, you'll have spells that can hit every enemy on the screen at once, and so that can be, really kind of classing that black mage up. And then the last mage character is called the red mage, and that is kind of a combo of white and black. Not as good as either, but they also have a higher defense. And they can actually do some damage with weapons versus your other 2 mage characters. Now, they don't have access to every black or white magic like a white mage or a black mage would, but they have a lot of the lower level spells, and again, they won't be as strong magic wise, but you will get better defense out of them and some hitting skills as well. So along with the role playing, you got the characters, you pick out your 4 characters, you start traveling across the world map. You can go through dungeons, you can go through villages, you can go through castles. Random encounters are prevalent throughout the game. Unless you're going into a village or a castle, you will be running into random encounters throughout. And then that will lead to level gaining. So you're starting off the game at level 1. As you gain levels based on experience points that you can win in battle, you'll gain a level after a certain amount of points. And as you're raising those levels, your stats will increase. So along with the leveling up stat increases, you will also get increases in your stats from your weapons and your armor. Specifically, your weapons will raise your strength stats. Your armor will raise your defense, magic defense stats, things like that. Those items, the weapons and armor, can either be purchased in stores, or they can be, a lot of the really best ones for sure, can be found throughout the dungeons that you explore throughout the game. So those random battles that you get into, they are turn-based, so you'll make your selections, and then all 4 of your heroes and then whatever enemies are on the screen will each take their turns battling, and kind of based on that speed kind of level that you have, the speed stat of each of your characters and the speed stat that each enemy has internally is kind of how that'll work on who gets to attack first and such like that. It's kind of, the battle screen is situated, and this was a first for role-playing games. A lot of role-playing games at this point were first person, so it was like you were looking out at the battlefield, so you would see enemies in front of you, but that you wouldn't really ever see your characters. What Final Fantasy did is they took all the characters and they put them kind of lined up from top to bottom on the right side of the screen, facing to the left, which is where all the enemy characters would show up. So you had enemies on one side, heroes on the other. They'd give you your hit point level, so you kind of knew how close you were to getting 0 hit points if you're getting hit too hard or things like that. And then at the bottom is where, as your turns would come up, you would see on the bottom part of the screen would be your action prompts, your fight, your magic, your using items or running from battle even. Those will all be kind of all along the bottom. And then speaking of magic in the first Final Fantasy, and this would change a lot of different directions it would go over the years, but the very first Final Fantasy, you actually bought your magic spells in shops. So you would go into villages, you would buy your spells, you would then equip those spells pretty much, or learn those spells through the item screen for your mages. And then as the mages would level up, they could use more and more of the spells. The first Final Fantasy, instead of doing like a magic point system, would have specific times you can cast a spell. And each spell would kind of fit into a different tier, 1 through 8. And as you're leveling up, your first tier ones, you would have more spells that you could use. Then your second tier, your third tier, as you're going higher levels, you'll be able to use those spells more times. And then you can use tents, or staying at the inn would help refill those magic slots along with refilling your hit points as well. So that's kind of your gameplay mechanics. The next section we'll go through is kind of the plot summary of the game. All right, so the real quick plot summary of the first Final Fantasy game is you are starting out with your 4 characters that you chose from the beginning as you're starting the game, and those are your 4 warriors of light. And each one of these characters has a crystal with them that has gone dark. The elements that kind of coincide with those crystals, so you got earth, fire, water, and wind. As those crystals have kind of darkened, the elements of the world are failing as well. So you'll have the earth is decaying because the earth element is dying down. The winds have died, so you're not getting the wind that you need for being able to, pollinate the earth and stuff like that. So that's going to cause issues. Water is flooding and causing these civilizations to sink. And then you got fire that's kind of raising and burning places as well. So all these elements are kind of going crazy. And so together, these 4 warriors are going to try to go out and repair their crystals, get them working again, and hopefully save the world as they do so. So on to story. Now, the first Final Fantasy game is fairly short at this point compared to the games that we see nowadays. Back in the early 90s, this was, top tier stuff. But now we're used to much more sprawling and side quests and a lot more options of stuff to do. So I'm going to go through this story pretty much start to finish. There's going to be spoilers. Again, this is a 35-year-old game. Hopefully most people played it. If not, I don't think telling you much about the game is going to really hinder you if you are interested in ever playing in the future. But So you turn on the game, you start up, your heroes are standing outside of a castle. The castle is called Cornelia. You go in and you learn that Princess Sarah has been kidnapped by the evil knight Garland, and they've gone up to a temple that is just north of the castle, and that's where he's holding her. So you level up a little bit, get some equipment put on you, swords and armor and stuff like that, get your magic spells, and you head up north to that temple. You go in, you fight, you defeat Garland, you rescue the princess. The king is so grateful that he builds you a bridge that you can now go to other areas of the world map. That's kind of how they kept you from to just stay in this one little area, is there's a canal or a river that you could not cross until the king built this bridge. So you go across the bridge. As you're going, you'll run across a cave with a witch in there called Matoya, a blind witch, and the only way she's ever able to see is through her crystal eye, which has been stolen. And that's kind of all you know right now, is that her eye has been stolen. So you got that in your back pocket. As you're continuing along, you'll come across a new town called Provoca, and that town is kind of a seaside town, and it's been taken over by pirates. So if you go into the town, you fight the pirates, you kick them out of the town, and they give you their ship. So now you've got a ship. You can go around the ocean. Now there's still... The ocean at this point is kind of enclosed by land, so it's almost more like a really large lake, and there's very few stops you can make. So pretty much your next step is one of the only steps you can really take at this point, is the elf city, which is called Elfheim. And you go in there, you go into their castle, and their prince has been put to sleep by the dark elf. You don't know who the dark elf is at this point. You just know the prince has been put to sleep. They do mention that there's another castle a little further down this area that you're in. So you go ahead and you go check out that castle, and you find Astos is there, and he's asked you to go to this underground dungeon to find a crown for him that he's lost. So you're like, okay, sure, let's go to the next part of the game. So you go into the underground dungeon, you find the crown, you bring it back to Astos, and hey, you find out he's actually the dark elf, and he's going to fight you now that you finally got him. What he wants, he wants to just take it from you at this point. So you fight him, you defeat him. You're able to find the crystal eye. He was the one who took the crystal eye from Matoya. So you now have the crystal eye. So take that. You go back all the way to where Matoya was at. You give her the crystal eye. Guess what? She's got some awake potion that'll wake up the sleeping prince. Yay. So you go down. You give the prince the awake potion. He wakes up, and he gives you an item called the Mystic Key. Now, as you've been going through the game at this point, you've noticed every now and then, in the temple where you fought Garland, and in kind of the castles that you've been to so far, Cornelia and the Elfheim one, there are sometimes doors you could not get in. They were magically sealed. Well, guess what? This Mystic Key will open those doors. The reason why you need to do that is behind one of those doors is a room that has a treasure chest that has TNT in it. And you can take that TNT and you can go to a cave where the dwarfs live, and somebody will take that TNT and they will blow up a hole, which will then open a new canal that you can now leave the kind of ocean area that you've been stuck in, now has a way out, and you can go to your next area. So you go to the next area, and the first village you come across is called Melmond, and you can tell the earth is really rotting around it. You can tell they're really being affected by the earth crystal not working. So you find out that there is a cave called the Earth Cave, which, makes sense. Earth crystal, Earth Cave. Let's head that way. You go down in there. You defeat a vampire who's down there who you get a ruby from. You'd have to take this ruby to a further down cave in the area, and you feed it to, or not feed it, but you give it to a giant that's there, and he gives you a rod that you can use to pop open this hatch that's down in the Earth Cave, and you can get down to the lower levels, which is where you will find the Earth Fiend. His name is Lich. If you fight him, you defeat him, all of a sudden your Earth crystal starts to glow again, and the decay of the Earth will start to, you actually physically see this in the game, but you can tell that now that the Earth crystal is alight again, the decay of the land has stopped, and things will start to get better when it comes to the Earth element. So after you've done that, now you can take your ship around to the whole other side of the world pretty much, and you'll find the only other village you can really connect to right now. And when you go in there, you'll find a ring of like old sage men that will kind of tell you about the way that the fiends are kind of controlling the earth now, and the reason the crystals are dying is because of these fiends. Well, you've defeated one of them, now you got to do the rest with the other three. So they give you a canoe. And this canoe that they give you, you can ride up the rivers to Mount Gullig, which is a volcano, which of course, fire, volcano, you're going to find the Earth Fiend in here. So you go down, you go through the volcano, and you come across Merilith, who is the Fiend of Fire. You defeat her, your fire crystal is glowing, and you're halfway there. Awesome. Around the same area with the rivers, there's also an ice cave, and you'll want to go in there because at the bottom of the ice cave, you will find an item called the Levistone. You need that lava stone to go to a little desert area that's down near the village where you got the canoe. And by having that stone, the airship will show up. And now you have an airship and you can fly around the world. You can visit lots of places. There's a couple little extra villages, but the most thing that you want to kind of get started is there's a castle called the Castle of Ordeals. You want to go into there because what you can find in there is something called a rat tail, which seems really like a silly item. But by having that rat tail, you've proven that you've gone through this Castle of Ordeals, and you can visit this island that's kind of to the side of the castle where the King of the Dragons, Bahamut, lives. And by giving him that rat's tail, he will give you a class upgrade for all of your classes. So let's say you started off as a fighter. Now you're a knight. You started off as a thief. Now you're a ninja. You're going from thief to ninja. I mean, it's pretty cool. You're going from a black belt to a master, and then you got your red, white, and black mages all becoming wizards. Red, white, and black wizard. So, knights obviously are hitting a little harder. Ninjas are actually hitting a little harder, and they still have that speed. The master is even better with his hands than the black belt was, and then your wizards can use higher levels of magic than your mages could. So that's the class change is kind of exciting time. Your sprites change, so your characters look a little different, and so that's a nice change for the game. Okay. So from there, it's time to continue on with our crystal saving. So we'll find the area where the sunken temple is at, where the waters had come up and sunken this village. And in order to be able to breathe underwater, you have to do a little kind of side questy kind of thing where you have to save a fairy from a desert bazaar. She's stuck in a bottle, and by saving the fairy, she will give you oxygen that you can use to breathe. It doesn't make a whole lot of sense, but it works. You're able to breathe and go down into this temple where you'll fight Kraken, who is the water fiend. And you'll also find a Rosetta Stone that you will need for the next portion of the game, too. So the Underwater Shrine has like an area where it's all treasures, and then an area where you fight the Water Fiend. Water Crystal glows. You're 3/4 of the way through there. Now it's time to go figure out about the Wind Crystal. So that Rosetta Stone that you found will teach you a language for this one city that you've seen before since you got in the airship. But you go in there, if you've ever gone in there before this, you would not be able to understand anything anybody's saying because they all are speaking a different language. But with this Rosetta Stone, you're able to learn that language, you're able to talk to these people, and you find the way to the floating castle, which is where the Wind Fiend is at. And so you got to go up this tower in the desert. It's called the Mirage Tower. You go up the tower, you portal up into the floating castle, you fight Tiamat, who is the Wind Fiend, and now your Wind Crystal glows. Yay, all 4 of your crystals are glowing. But you're not quite done yet. You realize now that you have the 4 crystals, they all are kind of leading you back to that first temple that you fought. When you fought Garland for Princess Sarah, that temple now has a portal inside of it that will actually time travel you back 2,000 years. There's your final dungeon now. So you're going through the final dungeon. As you're going through, you're going to have to refight the 4 fiends again. Lich, Merilith, Kraken, and Tiamat all show up at a different level. And then we get down to the final level, and you walk through the door, and Garland is standing there. The very first boss you ever fought is standing there. And you kind of find out that the fiends, they lived 2,000 years ago. When you defeated Garland, they brought him back in time 2,000 years. So he, wanting to try to live forever in this crazy time loop, sent the 4 fiends to the future to make all this stuff happen in the earth. It's the whole thing where now, because the fiends are going one way, he's going the other way, it turns into this big time loop. He's been doing it for centuries, and he's no longer Garland anymore. He is the demon Chaos. So you got to fight Chaos, you got to defeat him, you got to end the time loop, and that's it. You finish the game. You end the game. And so that's kind of the quick story of the first Final Fantasy game. You can probably finish that anywhere between 10 to 15 hours. If you're really running through it quick, it's good. But if you need to take some time to do some leveling up, so there is some level grind to it. So it can get you anywhere in that, like, let's say about 15-hour range, maybe on order. So let's talk about the legacy of the game. So released in Japan, 1987. It is a success. It is definitely, it's not the biggest game ever made, but it is a rather solid success for Square. So they decide, hey, let's release a US version. We just recently had Enix, who is another company that does RPGs, released Dragon Quest series over in the US as Dragon Warrior, and it did very successfully. So they go ahead and release Final Fantasy in the US in 1990. So between the Japanese version and the US version, by 1994, Final Fantasy has sold over 1.3 million copies. Runaway success. And speaking of like that Dragon Quest, Dragon Warrior series, some of the legacy of Final Fantasy, Dragon Quest and Dragon Warrior were kind of like the introduction to the JRPG, But Final Fantasy was really the popularity of the JRPG. It took the kind of template of RPGs for that Japan style RPG and really just ran with it. And obviously, 16 games later, we're still seeing just how strong that's been going. So obviously, big enough success that they just like, hey, let's throw a sequel together. And they start working on Final Fantasy II, which will be my next episode based on the Final Fantasy series. So thank you for listening today. I know this one's maybe a little bit longer, but I'm wanting to get a little more research and have a little more in-depth coverage on some of these things. So I'll be putting together another one for Final Fantasy II. I'm hopeful sometime next week, but I will definitely let you know when I have that ready to go. Thank you for listening. I hope this was fun for everybody, and have a great day. Thank you.